What if one of the Bible verses you've quoted your whole life was never what the original text actually said? Today, I'm walking you through 7 of the worst translation mistakes that still shape how millions understand Scripture. And I'll show you what the Hebrew really says, how the context changes the meaning, and why it matters for your faith and your study. Let's start with a classic, the apple in the Garden of Eden. You've seen the paintings, Adam and Eve, a glossy red apple, the serpent coiled nearby. But open the Hebrew and you won't find an apple anywhere. Genesis describes a specific tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and simply says its fruit was eaten. The word is peri, fruit, not apple. So where did the apple come from? Partly from art and partly from language drift. In Latin, malum can mean evil and also apple, which made for a memorable visual pun in medieval Europe. But the Hebrew never identifies the species. Jewish tradition has explored possibilities: fig, grape, wheat, even citron, not to rebrand the fruit, but to wrestle with the meaning of the act, the decision to take something God set apart. The point was never a botany lesson. The point was moral agency, wisdom, limits, and trust. When we picture an apple, we risk reducing a profound narrative about discernment into a grocery item. Now to the Exodus and the 4th plague. Many English Bibles still call it a plague of flies. The Hebrew word, however, is arov, literally a mixture. Ancient commentators and many modern scholars understand this as a mixture of wild, dangerous animals sweeping into Egypt, not harmless houseflies. Think of jackals, lions, and other predators pouring through streets and courtyards, terror striking day and night. That image aligns with the tenor of the plagues, existential, devastating, far more than a nuisance of insects. It also explains a detail that otherwise seems odd. Sources in the Jewish tradition stress that when the plague ended, God did not leave any spoils behind. With frogs, their corpses remained and stank, a lingering judgment. But with arov, none remained. Precisely so, the Egyptians couldn't harvest leather or meat and turn a divine judgment into economic gain. If the plague were just flies, why would it matter whether any remained? Wild beasts fits the context, the severity, and the logic of the narrative. This is a case where a small translation choice completely changes the movie playing in your mind. The next one isn't just a mistranslation, it's a misreading that has caused moral confusion. In Exodus 21, some translations make it sound as if the Bible permits a master to beat a servant so long as he doesn't die immediately. Read that again. It sounds like a license to abuse, but the Hebrew and the broader legal context say the opposite. The passage sets liability in a world that already had servitude. It narrows harm, not permits it. If a slave owner strikes a servant and the servant dies from the blow, the owner is punishable with the gravest penalty. He has taken a human life. If the victim survives beyond a day or two and the death can't be legally tied to the assault, the law shifts from capital liability to other penalties. That is an evidentiary threshold, not approval. And the very same Torah binds masters with obligations to provide food, clothing, rest, medical care, even dignified release with gifts that allow the person to restart life independently. Biblical servitude was regulated in ways designed to curb exploitation and emphasize personhood, a world apart from the race-based chattel slavery of modern history. You cannot wrench one clause out of its legal ecosystem and turn it into permission to brutalize. The text never grants that. It wrestles with harm in a fallen world and hems it in with accountability. Before we continue, I want to hear from you. Which of these mistranslations have you bumped into before, and which one surprised you most so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all. And if you value digging into the text behind the translation, hit like and subscribe. It tells the algorithm this kind of deep dive matters and helps more people get tools to read Scripture well. Let's tackle the charge that the Bible commands a man to stone a bride just because she isn't a virgin. That's how it's often thrown around online, usually stripped of all context. Deuteronomy does present severe penalties related to sexual faithfulness, but the key is legal stage and consent. In the Hebrew world, betrothal, erusin, wasn't casual. It was the first binding stage of marriage. A betrothed woman was already called a wife, and breaking the bond required a legal divorce. So when Deuteronomy addresses cases of sexual misconduct, it distinguishes between a married or betrothed woman and one who is not. The infamous passage about executing a woman concerns a specific scenario. A husband accuses his brand new wife of deceiving him, claiming she had been chaste while living in her father's house, but in fact she had engaged in sexual relations with another man. If that accusation proved true by the standards of the court, the law treated it as a grave offense against the integrity of the marriage and the family covenant. That is not a blanket policy for not a virgin in the modern sense. It is not a death sentence for a widow or a woman who had been previously married, nor a command to investigate and punish women's bodies. It is a case law in a specific legal system about deception and covenant faithfulness. Pull it out of that context, and the caricature is easy. Keep it inside, and the logic becomes clearer, even if the ancient penalties are hard for modern sensibilities. Closely related is one of the most grotesque distortions, the claim that if a woman is assaulted and doesn't scream loudly enough, she must be stoned. That line has been used to shame victims and to malign scripture. But that's not what the Hebrew law says. Deuteronomy contrasts two settings to help judges discern consent: the city and the field. In the city, help is physically near. If a betrothed woman is discovered with a man there and there's no sign she sought help, no cry in the language of the text, the court presumes it was consensual and both parties are guilty of adultery. Out in the field, where there is no one to hear, the presumption switches. Even if she cried, no one would have heard or come. The law sides with the victim and puts the guilt squarely on the man. Cry is not a ritual checklist, and the law is not punishing decibel levels. It's using common sense proxies in a world without forensics to protect victims and prosecute perpetrators. Translate those proxies into modern equivalents, calling emergency services, reporting, witnesses. And you can see the principle. Consent matters, context matters, and the benefit of the doubt goes to the vulnerable when help is out of reach. Turning that into "she didn't scream, so kill her" is a gross misreading that the text itself rejects. Now the headline that inflames everyone: the rapist must marry his victim. The Hebrew text in Deuteronomy describes a man who seizes a young, unmarried woman and lies with her. The man owes a significant bride price to her family, and the law says she shall be his wife, and he may not divorce her all his days. Read woodenly in translation, that sounds like the victim is forced to live with her attacker forever, an appalling idea. But the legal tradition around this passage makes the intent clear. First, the man is immediately liable for damages, for pain, humiliation, and lost future prospects, which in the ancient economy were real and measurable. Second, the marriage clause is not a mandate for her. It's a restriction on him. He can't exploit her and then discard her to compound the harm. The halakhic reading is unambiguous. She and her father, as her legal guardian in that culture, have the right to refuse. If she does not want him, there is no marriage, period. If, and only if, she desires to marry him for her own security and future, then he is bound to her and cannot send her away. Either way, he pays. The law was built to strip the man of advantage and leave the agency with the woman and her family within that society's structures. Translating it as a forced marriage does violence to the purpose of the statute. Finally, a quiet misunderstanding that has wounded many. The line that says a eunuch or a bastard may not enter the assembly of the Lord. Some have used that to bar people from synagogue or church, as if Scripture is excluding them from worship. But qahal, the assembly of the Lord, doesn't refer to a building or a prayer service. It refers to the covenantal marriage pool of Israel. These laws are about whom one may marry within the community, and under what conditions, not who may pray, learn, or be present with God's people. The case of the eunuch, for example, reflects sensitivity to conjugal obligations. The law acknowledges a wife's right to a full marital life, and in certain cases restricts a union that would deprive her of it. And the mamzer is not a casual, illegitimate child, but a specific legal category in Jewish law. None of this is a ban on seeking God. In fact, the prophetic texts explode with welcome. Think of Isaiah 56, where God promises the eunuch a name better than sons and daughters and flings the doors of his house open to all who hold fast to his covenant. Confusing marriage law with worship access is a translation and context error with pastoral consequences. If you've noticed a pattern, it's this: translation is never neutral, and context is king. Fruit becomes apple, a mixture of wild beasts becomes flies, a legal threshold becomes a supposed license to harm, evidentiary principles morph into victim blaming, protective marriage restrictions get twisted into compulsory unions, and covenantal categories about marriage get misapplied to prayer and belonging. None of those are small tweaks. Each one alters how we imagine the scene, how we judge the characters, and how we apply the text. So what do we do with that? We learn to read beneath the surface, we check footnotes, we compare translations, we ask what the Hebrew word actually says, what the legal context requires, how ancient audiences would have heard it, and how the broader canon clarifies it. You don't need to become a linguist overnight, but even a handful of Hebrew words, peri, arov, qahal, can sharpen your sense of what's happening. And when you do invest in the original languages, you'll find something remarkable. Questions that used to knot your conscience loosen. Texts that felt impossibly harsh reveal a wiser logic. And the God who speaks through Scripture emerges less like a caricature and more like the just and compassionate lawgiver the Bible claims him to be. If you've ever felt talked down to because you asked hard questions about a verse, let this encourage you. Most gotcha readings collapse when we honor the text on its own terms. The apple isn't the point, wisdom is. The plague isn't a buzzing annoyance, it's a terrifying judgment. The law isn't a cudgel for abusers, it's a fence against them. And the assembly of the Lord isn't a locked building, it's a covenantal people, with open doors to worship and wise guardrails for marriage. I'll leave you with this challenge. The next time a verse seems outrageous in English, ask two questions. What did the original words mean? And what was the situation the law or story was addressing? Let the Hebrew guide your imagination. Let the context reset the scene, and let the God of justice and mercy be the through line that keeps you from getting lost in translation. Thanks for watching. If this helped you see the text more clearly, share it with someone who's been wrestling with these passages. And in the comments, tell me which passage you want us to open up in the original next time. There's a lot more light where this came from.